Can DEI be saved? Should it be saved? Hi, I'm Scott Ott with Bill Whittle and Stephen Green. This episode of Right Angle is brought to you by the members at BillWhittle.com. And gentlemen, there's
shortest right angle ever.
A contemplative piece in the Wall Street Journal that says even some of the kind of the intellectual forces behind the creation of diversity, equity, and inclusion programs at corporations are having second thoughts and are trying to sort of re-explain to people what the purpose of these things are. And I found this very interesting. And it's not altogether, theoretically with that headline, it should be the shortest episode ever. But here's a couple of snippets from what they said in the article. They said, like other business fads, DEI piled on some of workers' least favorite things: extra consultants, more awkward human resources sessions, and new chiefs with lofty titles and fuzzy mandates. Some of the most visible steps that businesses took after George Floyd's, they say, murder in 2020 turned out to be ineffective, according to Harvard sociologist Frank Dobbin. Now, Frank Dobbin's the guy who wrote the book upon which much of the DEI movement has drawn its firepower. Now, he's more of a scientist and a researcher and didn't really lay out a program for this, but he just did a study of diversity and equity and inclusion issues throughout the decades. And basically, he is saying, hey, I think they misunderstood what we were trying to accomplish with this. Here's another great quote from the story, Steve. The unconscious bias training that was supposed to create anti-racist allies, turns out that people hate being told that they have hidden prejudices. So, Steve, I know what we all think about the general concept of DEI here, but do you think, in addition to pressure from social media influencers who have gotten big corporations to back off some of the DEI programs, do you think it's possible, in a sense, to save the idea of DEI, which is basically don't exclude people from any group from your talent search because you don't want to sacrifice good talent, and treat employees with dignity and be a welcoming place to work? Is it possible to salvage that if we get back to this root idea that essentially, Steve, it doesn't matter what people are thinking, it matters what they do at work? And so you don't have to dig up somebody's unconscious biases as long as they behave toward others with respect and dignity.
Well, the first step in making your workplace environment a pleasant one for people is to stop haranguing them for crap that they're not actually doing. It's the worst absolute thing in the world you can do. I had a personal experience with this. I was working for a big company in San Francisco. I was a very small peon, but it was a couple of years after the Clarence Thomas hearings, and the rage back then in all the big companies was you had to have a sexual harassment class for everybody. Yeah. And I attended this thing. It was mandatory. It was 2 or 3 days, couple hours each day. And on the very first day, this HR person, whose name I think was Karen, was explaining to the class that sexual harassment is in the eye of the harassed, that there aren't really any standards for what is sexual harassment. And I said, well, I want to be on my best behavior. I have a girlfriend, and I don't want to cheat on her, so I'm not going to be out there, saying rude or crude things to anybody. But if it's all in somebody else's mind, how do I know where the line is? How does anybody know where the line is? And she explained by staring at me with an expression that said, "If you open your mouth one more time, you're fired." Okay. I accept your I accept your explanation. And these fads come through. The thing is, the market always wins. It doesn't matter whether it's a government control or some corporate fad like DEI. The market always wins. And the best example I can think of that is a Walt Disney Company. They tried to put DEI as entertainment. Well, you might put up with it at work because you need the paycheck. You might just say, okay, I'm gonna lay low. Yep. I'm gonna deal with this. I'm gonna just keep collecting my paycheck every couple of weeks, and maybe this will blow over. But you don't have to go to the movies. You don't have to pay your 10 or 12 bucks a month, whatever it is, to Disney Plus. You get to vote with your feet and your pocketbook with every single entertainment choice you make, and they can't hector you into going to the movie theater. And Disney is learning that they can't do this anymore because they're losing money. The market always wins. Leave people alone. Most people are pretty decent. I go back to my teens and 20s, and race relations in this country weren't perfect, but the trend lines were good.
Yes.
The trend lines were good. And they were, I loved that. And then Barack Obama came along and poisoned the well. He turned us against each other, and that's how DEI got to flourish and all the rest. And that guy is he's absolute poison. And the thing is, if you looked at him last fall with his hectoring lectures, I think he knows he's poison, and no longer in the way that he's getting what he wants. People have recognized, even if they won't admit it, because his favorability ratings are still pretty high, but he knows that he's failed at turning us against one another. He was winning for a little while. We're winning now.
He could have closed the deal too. Just to add to that, he could have just closed the deal and put an end to it.
Yeah. Oh, that SOB.
So, Bill, this story quotes a woman whose name is Bo-Young Lee. I think she's originally of like Korean descent or something like that. She was Uber's diversity chief from 2018 to 2023. And she said that back then she would ask her staff, apparently it wasn't just one person, she had a staff of people, what's your job? To which they would typically respond with something like, to empower women and people of color. And she would say, wrong. Your job is to help the company make more money by ensuring discrimination doesn't cost us talent, customers, or good reputation. This seemed like blasphemy to some in the DEI movement because she was basically saying what matters in a corporation is the bottom line. And the only reason why we would do something like this is to protect and increase the bottom line. And she said people would come up to her and they would ask her like, well, hey, you know that guy, that vice president of whatever it is, he's acting like an ally with us, but I think he's just doing it to earn brownie points. To which Bo-Young Lee would respond, I don't care why he's doing it. I don't care what his internal thought world is. Anyway, Lee was put on leave back in 2023, and then she left the company after some employees were complaining that a workshop she led, which was titled "Don't Call Me Karen," was overly sympathetic toward white women. And so now she runs a nonprofit organization outside of that. But she said, basically, Bill, DEI should worry less about people's private thoughts and motives and focus on ensuring that people are treated fairly throughout the organization so they can do their best so that the business can make a profit. Can that kind of, probably under a different name, can that kind of thought process persist in corporate America without poisoning the well?
Well, this is why DEI is a fraud as it is stated by the DEI advocates, because the invisible hand of the market does the DEI work. The idea that a company would have an extremely talented person who was a black woman or an Asian woman or whatever the case may be, and not promote that person to their full capabilities because, she's just a black woman. Those days may have lasted until the 70s, but certainly we're talking about 2 generations ago. The company is going to promote the people that are going to do the best for the company. The market is going to solve the DEI problem if it's a question of exclusion. See, that's what DEI is sold as. It's sold as there's this idea that there's this institutionalized exclusion of talented people who are minorities, and they're being kept out of positions of power by this internalized racist, super secret power structure. But this just doesn't pass the smell test. Businesses need the best people they can in order to maximize their profits. And this it's an inverse form of the argument that I think is so effective against the line that you'll hear feminists saying, women get paid 72 cents on the dollar, to which men reply, that's obviously not true, because if it were, businesses would only hire women, and they'd immediately save 25% on payroll charges. It's just plain ridiculous. DEI is a form of, it's the same form of blackmail racket that started with Jesse Jackson and the Rainbow Coalition, where basically he would go to banks and say, hey, listen, sure would be a shame if we turn up tomorrow with 200 protesters in your lobby calling your bank a racist institution. If you want to make a small donation to the Rainbow Coalition, however, I'm pretty sure we could avoid that catastrophe. It's just a graft. The people who are the most vocal promoters of DEI and the great injustice that lurks out there in the business world are the people that teach DEI courses. And I'm with Steve on this. We went through one at PJTV. You guys weren't there. I worked in the office. You guys were generally calling in remote. But we had a sexual harassment day, and like Steve, any questions before we start? And I raised my hand. I wasn't in a good mood about this. It's like, yeah, why am I here? Well, you're here to learn about sexual harassment in the workplace. I said, it's bad, right? And she said, yes. I said, well, I already know that. I don't like being treated like a rapist or a molester. I don't like the fact that I'm in this room. If you want to have a class for people that have already crossed the line and generated complaints, that's one thing, So I say DEI, goodbye, out with the new year. And then next year we go after HR, because HR is a mechanism that is designed to generate complaints about people. If it turns out that somebody has really crossed the line in the workplace and you take it to the boss instead of to HR, then it's no longer like I'm going to HR just walking down the hall like I do 5 times a day. Now it's like it's got to be a serious charge that you can back up. Because HR is famously, in Iceland, something like 2/3 of the women went on strike for 2 days, and they said they never got more work done because there were no HR complaints. They just simply sat there, and everybody got along. So HR is an institutionalized organ that is designed to generate non-work activities. Somebody hurt my feelings. Really? Yes. Shelley said something very, very nasty about my costume this morning, about what I wore to my costume, about my outfit this morning. And it deeply hurt my feelings, and I feel like I'm a victim of a hostile work environment. Okay, well, let's bring Shelley into the office now, and then we have to have a conversation, and then we'll have a follow-up meeting. You see how this is just kudzu. So good. This is great. Steve's show was on how we've got new laws in California to penalize crimes, shockingly enough. Yeah, let's get rid of this monstrosity that is there for no other reason than to make certain people offering this cure for a problem that doesn't exist very, very wealthy.
So the upshot of the reevaluation of the DEI movement, essentially from within, or at least from people like Frank Dobbin, whose ideas were helped to generate the movement itself, is not necessarily, there are 2 levels of this. Number 1 is, hey, people have misinterpreted what this means. And number 2 is, the advocates themselves have made it into something that it was never intended to be. In other words, we have to change how people think, not just make it clear to people what the guidelines for respect within an organization are. And there was some talk about how diversity, equity, and inclusion efforts increased profits for companies, but that has come under increasing scrutiny and criticism as being not necessarily true, because the fact of the matter is talent is talent. Good people are good people. People know how to work together. People who know how to get things done. There's no racial or ethnic guidelines for how you find those people. You're just looking for good people. You can make the argument, and I think it's not unfair to make the argument, that in most organizations, we all tend to be insular in our lives. We connect with the people we connect with, and we may not have a wide network outside of our immediate circle. And our circle may be confined by where we grew up or even the kind of racial boundaries of our geography. And so it's not a bad idea to say, hey, are we missing out on some talent that might help us because we don't necessarily see them within our social network. And so, I don't think it's a crime or unethical to look around you and say, okay, who are we missing here that may be a great talent? But ultimately, profits increase as you get good people who are able to do effective work, who are treated with respect within the organization so that they feel like they have the freedom to contribute. And that doesn't have any sexual boundaries or color boundaries or religious boundaries. That is just, you're trying to build a good organization on talent. And so if profits increase because of diversity, equity, and inclusion measures, it may be correlation, not causation. It's more like, hey, we're just making it a serious effort to find talented people. And oh, look, we stumbled upon a whole area of people that we didn't even connect with before. And that's not a bad thing. In any case, there are already begun measures to try to rename the DEI, department, so to speak, or the DE or diversity chief. So they're coming up with new acronyms to describe that. Even though some big companies have backed away from their major commitments to DEI, that doesn't mean that companies in general. I think they did a survey recently. An organization called Teneo, Teneo, did a report where they said it used to be something like 99% of companies in the S&P 500 who reported in their sustainability report, they call it, diversity, equity, inclusion measures. It was 99%. Now it's 94%. So it's still, a lot of companies are still focused on this, but I think it's a salutary thing for the orthodoxy to be challenged and for people to stand up and say, look, under the guise of doing something good, you have turned this into some kind of a thought police operation that makes people feel guilty and ashamed for things that they didn't do. For Bill Whittle and Stephen Green, I'm Scott Ott. Thanks to the members at BillWhittle.com for making Right Angle possible.